Speaking about temperature, that's been an issue across the U.S. this summer with both tournaments. Lots of talk about the heat in Houston, Kansas City, Miami, Monterey. They will all be hosting World Cup games next year. We saw Borussia Dortmund go into the locker room during the game to watch the game on the TV and come out for their substitutions. Is this a valid excuse for teams, or is it a bit more of a cop-out, Brendan? You're, of course, there in the heat at MetLife.
Yeah, no, it's a real excuse, man. Winter World Cup, boys? What do you think? Winter in Vancouver in November and December? Well, why just let the Middle East affect the overall football schedule? This was an issue in '94, and this is going to be an issue again. And it's going to be hotter in some places. I do think that they've thought about things a little bit better. For example, it's not an outdoor LA 12 p.m. kickoff for a final, which was arguably one of the worst finals in World Cup history between Italy and Brazil. And that's not just an Italian bias or an Italian opinion that it was amongst the worst finals. It was awful. And it was because it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And it was 12 p.m. in Los Angeles, in Pasadena, on a Sunday to cater to a European television audience. The reality is the European television audience still dictates how games are scheduled. And so you're going to have more noon and 3 p.m. kickoffs than logically you should. So yes, the heat does play a factor. And in large part, I think that's one of the reasons why the quality of play in Qatar was so extraordinary. Like, all of those games were excellent. It really did feel like international football was back. And a lot of that had to do with them being in season, yes, but that the temperatures were comfortable. I don't believe that there was a single game that kicked off, certainly not a game that wasn't a noon local game. I'm almost positive in saying that. I don't think there was a single game where the field temperature was over 28 degrees Celsius in Qatar. And that was, yes, managed in part by the air conditioning within the stadiums that was at field level, but the air conditioning was turned off in all of those stadiums at sundown. That was just to manage the temperature within the bowl. It wasn't actually to influence and affect the field of play by having cold grass. That wasn't the intention. You don't have that. And I actually wonder, this is one of the conversations that we've been having in our stadium crew, is, are they going to institute some type of similar cooling system just to make it somewhat more manageable? Now, in a place like MetLife, where there isn't even any type of roofing or any type of coverage for the fans, I don't think you actually have the advantage of that. It's a complete open top, old Lambeau style stadium design. But in some places, I think it would be to the benefit for the fan experience, but also for the playing experience, to consider some type of Qatar-like cooling system. And that is not something that anybody thought about when North America was awarded the World Cup for 26 in 2018.
Yeah, there's a lot of ideas, a lot of solutions, but I agree. I mean, the heat is a big problem in a sense. Look, I think it's also, I wouldn't put it full valid excuse either. I think it's somewhere in between to answer the question itself. That, like, I think Canada, they're going to train this. They continue to train this. I think they'll still be able to play the way they want to for the most part. And they've shown that they can in the heat. But I think from FIFA's perspective, they absolutely have to consider all avenues, because some of the things we've seen over the last 12 months, such as, like, it's a Saturday. There's no reason why this game, Canada-Curacao, should have been kicking off, like I said, at 6 local when it was 34 degrees Celsius with all the humidity. It's the same reason why was there a game last year on like a Tuesday where in Kansas they played like 4 or 5 o'clock local, Canada-Peru. Like, that was an absurd scheduling decision. And I get, there's TV and all this to play into it. But I think for the World Cup especially, like, it is the World Cup. Everyone will, stop and watch, even if they're not in the country. Like, I don't think you should have to worry too much. I don't think Europeans are going to be mad if they're having to tell their bosses for a few weeks that, yeah, there's midnight footy on. I might be taking an extra morning break, especially in places like France. They'll laugh at it because the bosses will probably be doing the same thing. Granted, there's a balance. Ben and I actually had a great discussion about this on our run, about how you also need to balance local kickoff times, because I am worried of there being noon kickoffs local, because at the end of the day, yeah, there's still like people in school. There's still people in work. The World Cup also should cater to where it is. And so that's why for FIFA, I think they have to consider that. But the temperatures is a huge one, because it just ruins the football. It ruins the spectacle, and it puts players at risk. And if it's avoidable, why do it?
I've done 2 12 p.m. games here, and one of them was on a Monday. and I think it was Chelsea and LAFC in Atlanta would have been 3 p.m. and it looked like there was 2,000 people in there. That's one of those thoughts where it's like strategically, that Chelsea aren't traveling like any of the Brazilian teams. So it might make sense to make sure that they're in, a time slot where you're going to get fans. Because again, Tuesday, 3 p.m. here, you're trying to cater to some nighttime schedule. I don't think that the ratings matter as much. I don't think that that exposure matters as much in their local area as much as it does to have butts and seats. But it also affects the quality of play. If you have all of these 12 p.m. kickoffs in Vancouver, BC Place, I would argue that the quality of the game will not be as good if you consistently have these early abnormal kickoff times. Their bodies are not conditioned for that. Yes, they can play and yes, they can perform, but you're not going to get that same peak level that you get with night kickoffs. You just can't.
There will be some stadiums at the World Cup that, of course, are air conditioned and a little bit climate controlled, especially with some of these NFL stadiums. But BC Place isn't one of them that has a roof. So if it's raining, it's fine, but it's definitely not climate controlled. And with the windows, it becomes more of a greenhouse, which might help the grass. And I think Jesse Marsh's type of grass, not Snoop Dogg's. But greenhouse could help that as well. But definitely not a comfortable stadium in the summer, especially when the roof is closed.